welcome and thank you for joining Blindsided Whitetails podcast. We're starting this podcast basically to help the Michigan hunters. Michigan gets a bad rep. Talk to a lot of people, and most of the time you hear Michigan has small deer or Michigan deer hunting is hard, when in fact Michigan deer hunting is hard, but we do have good deer. Public, private, there are good deer in Michigan. So in general, starting this podcast is really to bring on a bunch of successful hunters. Majority of it's going to be public. We're going to have some private permission access hunting, but really just to bring their successes to you. Learn tips, some tricks, why, how, what they did, what their setups are. More so to bring light to all the things these guys are doing to make themselves successful. So that's what the podcast is about. Today's podcast is we're going to bring on Spencer Brackins. Spencer's an avid hunter. As you can hear by him talking, very passionate about what he does. Videos, does great films. Him and his dad started it. They got a few other guys with him. But Public Land Prowlers is the page and the YouTube channel they run. Good group of guys, very avid about what they do. So we're going to jump right into it, and you guys can hear our conversation. So thanks again for listening. All right, so I'm going to give Spencer a call right now.
Hello?
Hey, Spencer's Brian, how are you?
What's up, man? Not too bad.
Good. So good to get you on the phone.
Yeah, for sure.
On the phone with me now is Spencer. He is the founder of Public Land Prowlers. It looks like you and your dad do it.
Correct.
So, give me a little info. What do you guys do mainly? I mean, how did this start? Where'd you guys, how did it found?
So, Public Land Prowlers obviously is the show. So, for those of you who don't know my background, I spent 3 years professionally guiding in southern Indiana, and I kind of left my roots to go do that. And after 3 years of doing it, kind of felt like I was leaving my dad and my grandpa behind. And they're only getting older, obviously. My dad's 52, my grandpa's 74. Both still hunt with a regular compound bow. And actually, my grandpa's still running gun hunts with us on public land.
That's awesome.
With a stand and sticks and everything. And 74, I can only hope that I'm doing it when I'm that old. So
right, half that age.
Yeah. So after 3 years of guiding down there, I realized that I wanted to get back to my roots and spend the last, however many years that they got left hunting with them, and kind of get back to hunting with them instead of just hearing their stories over the phone from 250 miles away.
Right.
So, long story short, I came back home and I was like, man, previously I had filmed a show and I was kind of going for like the Lee and Tiffany, Michael Waddell feel, like managed land, food plots, minerals, the whole 9 yards. And I started to realize that I couldn't get to my shooters. They were either living on another property and I only had 40 acres and I couldn't get them to call my place home.
Right.
So after guiding and learning more and more about mature deer and how they work, I wanted to get back home and make it all come back together with family. So I was like, how can I do that and still film a TV show? Well, there you have it. Now you have Public Land Prowlers, and basically it's me, my dad, my grandpa, and another guy by the name of Daryl Sutliff. He's from Owasso, Michigan. We kind of put everything together. I had gotten the wheels in motion, and the first year, it was a little rough. I think we only got 2 doe kills on film and a 1 Ohio buck that was like 115 or 120 inches late muzzleloader season. And from there, Daryl kind of, he's always killed big deer. He's a stone cold killer. But he's never been into like public land buck bed hunting, and that's really what I really started gearing my tactics towards, was specific bed hunting and like beast style tactics, Dan and fall kind of stuff. And so the more and more that we hung out, and the more and more that all the guys got together, and we started listening to podcasts, watching Dan and fall videos, watching the hunting public, stuff like that, the more that we all started to, you know, connect the dots on these guys are all killing these deer in bedding areas. Well, so we just kept educating ourselves more and more and more on bed hunting, and now you have it. We're on year 2, and I think today's November 15th, and we've got 6 kills on film already this year. So connecting the dots, you know, leading forward into that conversation, is one of the key things I wanted to key in on in this conversation was, you know, our first year. So I've been hunting public land for 2 years. This is my 3rd. Leading into this year, previous years, I was trying to key in on one specific bed in a bedding area. No matter where I went, it seemed like early season, I was trying to key in on one specific deer's bed, whether it was in swamp number 1, 2, 3, 4, wherever I was, per the wind direction. I wasn't always hunting the same deer, but I was always hunting whatever deer I was after. I was hunting a specific bed for him. And I never had a lot of success. I never seen them usually. They may have been there and knew I was there. My access might not have been right. Thermals might have got swirly on me and pulled down near water, or, you know, it was a learning game with thermals, wind, terrain. And another thing that I messed up on was I was hunting doe bedding early rather than hunting buck bedding early, and I was just trying to be in the deer at times. And so going into this year, I shot my best public land deer to date this year, and it was in Indiana, and it was on that double with my dad. But something that really connected the dots for us this year was early season. You know, with all this public land pressure that we have, not only because of this trend that's kind of come about with Dan Infalt and the hunting public and all that, everybody seems like they want to saddle hunt or be mobile, and it's kind of like a fad now, right? So, with that being said, and then COVID-19 isn't helping anything with everybody being off work.
Everybody's in the woods.
Yeah, it's like everybody we talk to is like, there's more hunting pressure this year than there ever has been out here. And we're talking to people. We're started hunting a new piece of public this year, and we've talked to multiple people in parking lots, and they're like, I've been hunting here 25 years, and I've never seen anywhere close to this amount of pressure.
Oh, it's
and
crazy.
That's not helping anything. I mean, Michigan's already pressured enough, right?
Yeah.
So connecting the dots into this year with our previous 2 years, one thing that really helped us was in early season hunting deer bedding areas. So we knew of a good deer in the swamp that we go into, let's just say. Well, instead of trying to hunt him out of his specific bed, we knew we were in the game within 100 yards of wherever he was bedding, but we were not putting all our eggs in one basket trying to kill that deer coming from that one bed. We were more so hunting the deer in the bedding area, and we had a lot more success on buck sightings this year. And I think sometimes, you know, you can get over aggressive, and that's really hard for me to say because I'm an extremely aggressive hunter, but I think at times I was being too aggressive, and I probably was bumping the deer out coming in. And ever since I quit trying to get myself within 60, 70, 80 yards of the buck bed that I know he's using on a wind direction, I would just back off and hunt the deer coming out of the bedding area as a whole. And usually, like this year, I'd see the bucks coming out with other bucks, and I'd see bucks coming out with does, and they're just kind of doing what deer do, you know, coming out of the bedding area, headed to their food source. So that's exactly how we killed our Indiana deer. We were hunting deer bedding areas, and obviously that was a rut hunt. So going into the rut, we're going to hunt doe bedding areas because you're going to get them bucks checking the downwind sides of doe pockets, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, what happened was I kicked a doe up earlier in the day, and where she was laying down, I literally put my dad 20 yards from where she was laying down, where I kicked her up with 2-shooter bucks on a midday scout. And I knew she was an estrus because the 2 big boys were locked down with her, so I knew that she had to be real close to being ready. And with her laying there, I knew that there'd be estrus on the ground or right in the area from her being there.
Smell it, right?
And my dad's buck came in and was headed right for where she was laying, and the whole way in he had his nose up in the air. So
it's like a bait pile.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So it's one thing that I've learned. Me and my dad were actually just talking about this earlier. Is instead of hunting one specific bed, hunt the bedding areas, and you'll be a lot more successful on deer sightings and on harvesting from what we can put together.
Yeah, it's definitely, you're spot on with that. So let's with the beds, we're going to kind of elaborate on that. Let's go back to, how do you find them? Say, Michigan has all kinds of swamps. I mean, it's a wetland. But how do you go about scouting? Do you do it early season? Do you do it post season? Do you do it? I mean, obviously in season is important, but how do you find your areas? You use maps, Onyx.
Yeah, so a lot of people like Onyx. I'm not really a big fan of Onyx myself, just because I've been using hunt stands since I was guiding.
Okay.
And I have the pro membership, so I pay for it. It's like, I don't know, like $14 a year or something.
It's a good app.
But the thing that I like about hunt stand is you get all the states. It doesn't matter. You don't have to buy it per state like Onyx.
Gotcha.
So, and I think Onyx has a little bit more accurate lines. Some of the hunt stand lines are off just a tiny, tiny bit, but you can pretty much tell once you get there.
Yeah, it gets you close enough.
Yeah, it gets you really close. And some of them are spot on. It's just some places they get added on that are not exact. But so getting to your question on how I find my bedding areas, most of my scouting starts in March. As soon as we get like down to 2 inches of snow, if we got a heavy snow, like late February, and it piled up, and then we got to wait for it to start melting off. Okay. I'll wait until we get about 2 inches down to an inch or so in there, where you're starting to be able to see rubs that aren't, hidden by drifts or anything like that. And my favorite is when there's about a half inch of snow on the ground, and I'll go in and I'll just start pinning places on my hunt stand that look really good. Most of it starts in March, and from there I just start checking areas off as I go. And I'll drop 60, 70, 80, 100 pins throughout, like over the winter, that I've found that I like.
So what are you specifically looking for? So when you're doing that, what are you keeping in the back of your head? Like, I want to see big rubs,
a lot of times I'm looking for like transition lines on a swamp, along hardwoods or something that looks, if I can zoom in on it, looks like there might be some autumn olive or some red brush or some pockets of brush in the middle of the marshes.
Thick transition, gotcha.
Big lone trees. A lot of people don't know that when you're looking on satellite maps and you're looking at a swamp, your darker areas, like it looks like a dark circle or something in the grass marsh, usually dark, from what I've discovered, is cattails.
Okay.
Or like a foxtail or something like that. Yeah. So when I'm honing in and I zoom way in, like if I'm on my computer and I zoom way in on it, I'm looking for pockets of thickets. I'm looking for big lone willow trees. I'm looking for pockets of cattails or foxtails or phragmites. I'm looking for transition lines of pockets of thicket that might run along the side of a hardwoods, like 20 yards wide by 100 yards long, along the inside edge of a hardwoods in a marsh.
Okay.
That's where I find a lot of my bedding, is just on the inside transition of the hardwoods down in the marsh, like autumn olive, red brush, red osier dogwood, stuff like that. And that's where I start finding a lot of my rubs, is in that kind of stuff. And don't let it. This is another thing that I learned. Don't let it. The guys out there, don't let this fool you. When you go in there and you're finding all these rubs and everything, and you're finding beds, you got to remember that your doe bedding is going to be group bedding. So you're going to find where multiple deer are laying in multiple different directions.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually your doe bedding. And then when you start getting into buck bedding, you're going to get less beds. You might only get one bed. And a lot of times there's going to be a rub in the bed if it's a buck bed.
So are you finding those, not to cut you off here, but
no,
the buck beddings to doe bedding? So a lot of guys get this confused. Most of the guys I talk to, and you explain that, what you just said to them, and they say, well, how far do I got to go? Like, how much further away from the doe bedding are the buck beds? It's different per se, but...
That can be really, really tricky, actually.
What do you find?
Sometimes it's 30 yards, sometimes it's 300 yards. It just depends on the terrain. It depends on a lot of different things. But generally, I'm finding, if I'm trying to draw a happy medium just to help people out here, usually 70 to 150 yards I'll start finding the buck bedding. And honestly, my first 2 years, like this year, I really started to connect the dots on this also, was I was finding these awesome beds of buck beds, and I was finding rubs that were just shredded up. And I've set up on them and on previous years, and like I said, nothing. And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck, man? This area was just destroyed when I scouted it. Mm-hmm. Big buck sign, big beds. I mean, big loam beds, just absolutely perfect for a dynamite buck bed. And I'm not seeing nothing. What am I doing wrong? This is exactly what Dan Infalt does and kills slammers every year.
Right.
Well, I think, to be honest, when I'm going in and finding all this sign that is all shredded up, I've come to the conclusion now, and it's funny that I'm doing a podcast on this because I was literally just having a conversation with somebody on this like 2 days ago. But I think that is rut activity that I'm finding.
Yep.
I think a lot of those rubs, when I'm finding these shredded up areas and beds and stuff, I think that is rutting activity that I'm finding.
Yeah, mid to late season, right.
I'm almost 100% sure on it now that I've got that pretty much, those empty dots that you got to connect year after year after mm-hmm. year when you're learning this style of hunting. And that's one thing that I've really gathered intel on this year was, you know what? I'm seeing these bucks in the areas that I thought that they were early season in the rut.
Yep.
So that leads back to my scouting. I was finding all this torn up sign in here. This is a doe bedding area, and the buck is in here in the rut. Is
yep.
what's happening.
Yep.
So, but getting back to the doe bedding from the buck bedding, it just depends on the food source. It depends on the travel routes. It depends on your predominant wind. You got to take all that stuff into consideration because remember, your buck in the rut is going to want to lay, or pre-rut is going to want to lay where your predominant wind is going from the does to him, to where he can smell if they're coming in the heat. And a lot of times when it rut is like you're right on that, those 10 days before they're going to come into heat, your big bucks are going to be right in there with the does. They're not going to be bedded 70, 100 yards away anymore. They're going to be right there with them and waiting for them and bumping them around and, getting them going, and then they're going to be chasing them throughout the day. And they'll usually, from what I've noticed and filmed this year, is they'll lay down with them when they're laying down for the pre-rut, but when the buck's ready, he's ready, and he's going to bumper all around that area.
Yeah, when she starts coming into estrus, then he's locked on.
Yeah, and then when he knows that 48-hour cycle of breeding is going to happen, estrus, then he's going to stay locked down with her, and that's what, my personal opinion, I think that's where Michigan is right now in their season. I think that we're in lockdown.
Yep.
And that's when, for those people that don't know, you got your pre-rut, your rut, and your lockdown. Your pre-rut is when the bucks are ready, the does aren't. So your bucks are going to start being curious towards your does. They're going to start kind of harassing them a little bit, but they will lay with them still, mm-hmm. just trying to be, hey, what's up, girl? And then when the bucks get that next gear shift into I'm ready, you need to be ready, then they're going to start harassing them to the point where they'll get them up out of their beds and chasing them all over hell and back. And then you get your seeking phase, which is pretty much the same thing. The bucks are 100% ready, and they know that the does are moments away from being ready.
That's when cruising occurs.
And then you got your lockdown. When that estrus cycle happens for 48 hours, that buck is going to breed that doe as many times as he can to make sure that she's bred, and he'll stay with her, and every time she gets up, he's going to try and breed her.
Yep, that's exactly it. So lockdown really, I guess in my eyes, and I learned a lot of this from watching the hunting public, really, before I was really mobile, but I wasn't really finding the fresh sign. I did the scouting like you did. I would find the archive stuff, and I'd keep them back in my head and mapped. But what really kind of got me on the big deer the last couple of years was finding that fresh sign, especially in this period. Because if you hunt, say that stuff we scouted in the bedding area, and that buck's with a doe somewhere, he's not going to move into it because he's not looking anymore.
Exactly.
So yeah, spot on for that.
Yeah, the hunting public is spot on with all their stuff. Them guys are top notch at what they do. I give them guys so much credit because they make everything look so easy.
Yeah, it's definitely awesome. It's one of the, watching them do what they do is really cool. It's hard to portray to Michigan because I know they came here and did their public challenge and everything, but it was early season in a kind of a remote area, so it wasn't really fair to me. But
they struggled though. I mean, if you ask them, yep. I've talked to them about it. I've talked to a couple of them about it on Facebook, and they say to this day, Michigan Public Land Challenge was the hardest challenge that they've had.
Oh yeah. It was.
Because it is, man. Michigan is no joke. And people say there ain't big deer in Michigan. There ain't big deer. They're here.
You just gotta do more
You gotta
scouting.
learn them, and you gotta be a wolf. You know.
Yeah.
You gotta. I know a guy by the name of Paul Putera from Wisconsin. He's a big beast hunter.
Okay.
And that guy's killed 4 bucks in 4 states this year, and on 4 still hunts. Which awesome. A still hunt, for people that don't know, is a step every 10 minutes.
Yeah,
and this dude knows his deer down to the track. I mean, he knows the exact track that this deer leaves.
That's
and
awesome.
He shot a 150-inch 10-point in New Jersey.
That's hard to do.
Spot and stalked him.
Yeah.
I'm talking still hunted him down in his bed and shot him in his bed.
That's super neat hunting. It's hard hunting for sure. It's
I mean, the detail that some guys can retain is just unbelievable to me. And I like to think of myself as a pretty elite hunter, but guys like Paul, man, like some of the things that he tells me he does, I'm like, man, I don't even think to do that. Like,
yeah, it's wild watching the different strategies. It's definitely neat to see how many different ways you can actually harvest an animal.
Yeah, I mean, talking about he tracked down this deer in 4 days. He tracked him 2 miles and killed him.
That's wild.
And just kept tracking him down. One day he'd get so far and never seen him. Next day he'd get so far and never seen him. And he'd just keep following this deer. And he said this deer was just leaving sign as he went. And he knew it was his sign because he said he was only rubbing certain size trees and bigger. So he'd just keep following this deer's tracks and his rubs, and tracked him for 2 miles and ended up shooting him in his bed.
It's all about learning, man. That is elite
as elite gets to me. I mean, I could never even imagine doing something like that. Like, you literally hunted this deer down in his tracks.
Yeah, it's wild to see. It's cool. So,
I wish the guy filmed, because that would be something to see.
Yeah, that's another thing that I guess we could mention is a lot of the best hunters you don't know about because they don't care to film. They don't broadcast any of it, but these guys can kill just monsters. They don't get them mounted. It's just...
Nope.
it's amazing.
Add it to the collection bucket.
That's exactly it. So, all right, let's get back to your beds. So I just want to kind of go full circle with that. So once you scout your beds, what's the next process? What do you do about setting up? Like, do you mark that on the map? Do you come in and then once you determine how you want to set up, how do you go about accessing it? Is it wind specific? Do you not hunt certain areas? I mean, what do you do?
So actually, once I find my beds, my next step isn't even my kill tree. It's where's the food source.
Right. Okay.
And food sources change per the week. From what I've learned, it could be some kind of wildflower in the swamp early. It could be duck potato. It could be red osier dogwood. It could be autumn olive browse. It could be a lot of different things. So I really try to, once I find the beds, I take a good walk around and try to figure out what's around. And then once I figure out what's around, then I'll try to pick out a couple different kill trees per where the food sources are. Now, wildflowers and stuff like that are really hard to determine until spring because you just can't see them. They're dead. They're gone. You don't see them. Nothing, not in March, April. They're not there. So, a lot of people, I think, skip out on the fact of how much water and food and protein a deer can get out of a wild plant.
Yep.
90% of deer's water intake is through plants. A lot of people don't know that. But that's a proven fact from a research center that I read about. That 90% of their water intake is through wild plants. And I was like, no way, how's that even possible?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a real thing. So, like protein, wildflowers, and arrowhead plant and stuff like that, that stuff's like 90% protein for a deer. So, that's one thing that I really try to key in on after I find my beds is food sources. So, I'll get a good idea on where the oaks are, where the crop fields are, where your basic food sources are. And then come spring, when stuff starts to green up or starts to grow, leading up to that spring-summer transition, I'll go back in and just do a very light scout in the area of, like, in the marsh. I won't intrude the bedding, but around it just to get an idea of the habitat if it's a new area, what kind of plants are growing in the marsh and stuff like that. And then I have my kill trees picked at that point based on the food sources and then wind direction.
Okay.
So if I'm hunting wildflowers in the swamp or just a browsing area, I'll have 2 or 3 trees picked out for wind direction on that. And then if I'm hunting oaks, I'll have 2 or 3 different trees picked on wind direction for those. Dogwood, stuff like that, I'll have a couple of different trees picked out for those. Now, in some of the areas, I say a couple trees. Sometimes there isn't a couple trees, right? You just kind of go with the punches and deal with what deck of cards you're handed, because sometimes the best one to hunt an area is the worst one to hunt an area for you.
Yep.
So a just off win sometimes. I'm sure you've heard of the term date the fat chick, because sometimes she don't look the best, but she works out for the night.
Yep.
But that happens to me a lot. I end up, in an area and I'm like, man, my wind is just off, but I got to get in this tree right here. So a lot of times some areas only offer 1 or 2 trees, and you don't get a bunch of different wind-specific trees to pick from. You just kind of got to send it.
That's exactly
and,
it.
So once I find my beds, the next step is definitely determining where the food sources are, and then I'm no master at this game yet, but I'm definitely getting there. I'm starting to be successful every year, and learning what food sources are hot when is something that I'm still trying to learn. It's really amazing on how quick a food source can just shut off.
Yep.
And that's something that I'm trying to learn myself, but I'm definitely starting to learn that wildflowers are hot, man. I was blown away on how hot those are
now,
this year.
Saying that, you're speaking early season.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. As soon as, I'm talking October 1st.
Yep.
Them wildflowers, deer destroying them.
So what, I guess to kind of add to this, You got early season. Do you have spots that you're saving that you know are going to be real good in the rut, or are you kind of just staying out of the deep bedding for late season and hunting those entrance to the food sources, or what's your thoughts on that?
Being a bed hunter, bedding area hunter, I hate to even say the word bed hunter anymore
Right.
because I've completely transitioned off of one specific bed into completely just hunting bedding areas. So, being a bedding area hunter, I'll rephrase that. I don't really have my spots that you know, being private land, I used to have my spots I wouldn't touch until the rut. But now I just know that I hunt my buck bedding areas in the early season. I hunt my doe bedding areas in the rut. And then in the pre-rut between those two, I'm kind of just hunting travel routes and hoping that catch a cruising buck. And then late season, like right now, to be honest, I don't really hunt gun season a lot. If I do, it's with a bow. I just don't enjoy being in the woods during gun season. I've had bullets sent over my head. I've had some bad things happen, and I just am not crazy about it. So, but during gun season, when I do hunt, I get into the thickest, nastiest crap that I can find, and it's usually just random. I'll usually just scout my way around for a day or two before I even go hunting, and then I'll find where the deer have yarded up in an area and hunt it. And it's usually stuff that no other human being wants to go through. It's thick, nasty stuff that they've got pushed into. And then late season, just to kind of cover the whole thing from early to late, I'll hunt my buck bedding early. Then I transition into travel routes in between bucks and does bedding for pre-rut. Rut, I'm in the doe bedding areas. Gun season, I'm in the thick, nastiest crap that you can get to where deer have yarded up. I don't just go into a thick area and hope to find deer. I'll scout my way around and find where deer have been pushed into. And then into the late season, I really, really, really practice thermal bedding. So that's what I've had really good success with is thermal bedding. And to touch on that, for people that don't know what I mean by thermal bedding, I'm talking about pine trees, cedar trees, stuff like that. The reason it's called thermal bedding is because the sun attracts to it. So if you're to throw a thermometer out in the yard in the summertime with a black t-shirt over it, and you throw a thermometer in the yard with a white t-shirt over it in the summer, which thermometer do you think is going to get hotter?
Right.
The one that's black because it attracts the sun more. Mm-hmm. So the same thing happens in the winter. Your deer are attracted to the pines and the cedars because those hold their needles all year in their foliage. So underneath cedar trees and pine trees, normally snow don't get under there. One, because it's blocked by the foliage, but two, if there is any, it melts underneath of it because of the thermal pull from the sun. Mm-hmm. So that's where I try to key in on geothermal. That's funny. It's super funny that I said that because my buddy always messes with me about it, and he's a HVAC guy. Mm-hmm. So there's a such thing called a geothermal heater, and he messes with me whenever I'm talking about thermal bedding. He's like, I don't know anything about thermals, but he's like, I know something about geothermals. He's like, I'm just start calling it geothermal bedding.
That's it. That's a good way to remember it.
So now he just got me tongue twisted on a podcast calling it geothermal bedding.
That's funny.
But no, thermal bedding is my late season tactic, and I try to cut them off going to a food source. Like I have one spot that I'm saving for late season, and it's bush honeysuckle, oak flat, but just adjacent to it, there's a still standing to this day private cornfield with thermal bedding to about 80 yards away. So they'll come from the thermal bedding and browse on the honeysuckle and oaks, and then they make their way out to the cornfield at dark. So that is one of my money spots for late season that I have not ever hunted in late season that I found this year that I'm extremely excited to hunt here in December. So
that's awesome.
If you can find pines and cedars in late season, you're gonna find deer. I mean, it's just flat out that's how it works. I've hunted a lot of areas and late season with pines, and I hardly ever go without seeing a deer. So.
Yeah, they're definitely in there. The tarmac swamps, the pine cedars, yeah, it's all.
Yep.
spot on all that.
And sometimes it's not even the swamps for me. It's south-facing slope pines, man.
Mm-hmm.
They're on
Oh, yeah.
fire because a lot of people don't know that the south-facing slopes, that's the side of the ridge that the deer are going to bed on because that's the side that the sun's hitting all day. So, like, mold and fungus only grows on the north side of a house because the sun don't ever hit it. And then it's the complete opposite for a ridge. The south-facing slope of a ridge, the sun hits all day. So that's another thing to key on is you don't have to be in the pines to find deer. You can find a really good south-facing slope that gets a lot of sunlight, and you'll find deer there also. And maybe it's just got a bunch of deadfalls or something that they can get up in and feel safe.
Good deal. So, that covered pretty much this locations and everything. Got any tips on what do you do for a setup? Are you I know you said sticks. What's your you do a stand saddle? What do you hunt?
Yeah, no, I don't wear a tree diaper. I've tried like 4 different saddles and I absolutely hate them. When I guided and stuff like that, and I'm not knocking saddle guys at all, so don't think I am, but it's just personal experience.
Yeah.
I've experienced and helped, even just this year, more bad shots out of a saddle than I ever have hang-ons. It's just that right side shot for a right-handed shooter, it's awkward, and it's really, if you don't practice it enough, it's really easy to make what they call the saddle low shot.
Yep.
And I just personally think that you can maneuver better in a tree stand and be more secure with your footing and shot placement. So I run Timber Ninja C1 carbon fiber sticks. Those sticks are absolutely out of this world light. They're 1 pound a piece. They feel like a feather. I mean, literally, if I hold a turkey feather in one hand and a carbon fiber stick in the other from Timber Ninja, they feel identical. It's mind blowing.
How do they the carbon fiber? I'm curious about it. How are they? Are they sturdy? They're
extremely sturdy, and a lot of people worry about the structural integrity of them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't realize that they use carbon fiber on spaceships,
right.
So they're definitely meant for the cold. Outer space is one of the. I mean, you're not going to find colder, right? So that they use the carbon fiber on spaceships, and this stuff has been tested 650 pounds of pressure for 3 hours and didn't break.
Cool.
So I don't think you're going to find a 650-pound human trying to go up a tree.
Yeah, not very easily.
So, yeah, they are absolutely ridiculously light. I'm using Eastern Woods Outdoors daisy chains. I don't really like rope. I've tried it, like some static rope or something like that. I've tried it. It's just not for me. It stretches a little bit too much. So I use the flat daisy chain from Eastern Woods Outdoors. And I'm running a Lone Wolf Assault 2 until Timber Ninja comes out with their stand that's going to be, I can't say how light, but the lightest stand that's ever been produced. So once I have the stand and sticks, I'm also getting their camera arms. So basically my entire setup will be carbon fiber.
Yes.
And it should be under 10 pounds with everything.
That's wild what they're doing with it. Their stuff is definitely super light.
Yeah, have you ever personally felt the Timber Ninja sticks?
No, I haven't. Man, I know how light it is.
Unbelievable. Like, people think the heliums and stuff like that are light, and then I hand them one of my sticks, and they're like, oh my god.
Yeah, I want to go out. I want to see. The 2 that I want to get would be the Ninjas and then Tethered's new Tethered 1 stick.
Tethered 1 stick, yep.
So
I have never felt those, but they look pretty cool.
Yeah, they're neat.
And then to go over the rest of my setup, just for people that are curious, the heavy arrow builds have bailed me out of some situations this year. I hit my buck high in the shoulder blade. I'm shooting a 600 grain arrow build. I shoot a Vantage Point Archery VPA broadhead. I shoot Ethics Components, a Serious Archery Products, Apollo 250 spine, and I'm shooting a 4-fletch with VaneTech vanes, and the heavy arrow has definitely bailed me out of situations that I probably would be not sleeping over if I wasn't shooting that build with say I was shooting like a 380 grain arrow with Rage or a Swacker or something like that. I wouldn't have found the 2 deer that I shot this year, I don't think. So Not that I wasn't aiming where I hit this year, because I was testing my arrow, and I've put the same arrow through 3 sets of shoulders this year, and I haven't broke it. So, and I've stuck in the dirt on the other side every single time. So, if you don't shoot a heavy arrow build, I strongly encourage that you do the homework on it. I think the hunting public has spoke on it quite a bit this year. We speak on it a lot, and you can see in our videos this year that the heavy arrow build has definitely bailed us out of something that wouldn't have been pretty in a couple of situations. So
yeah, it's definitely that energy the arrow carries is important. Well, I think
exactly.
a lot of people got away from it.
important.
A lot of people got away from it with all these mechanical broadheads and everything. But the heavy setup, I definitely agree with.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason not to. A lot of people think that you got to have speed to kill, and that's exactly the opposite of true, because I'm shooting 70 pounds out of an Expedition MX-16 at 70 pounds, and I'm shooting 261 feet per second with a 600 grain arrow build. That's absolutely a hammer.
Yeah.
That's I shot a doe. I missed her, and she ran out and started snoring at me. She stopped at 39 yards and turned around and looked, and I already had another arrow knocked, and I pulled back and shot her at 39 yards after she was already alert. And mind you, this is a 7.5-year-old doe that was aged by the DNR, and my arrow zipped through both of her shoulders before she could even move.
Yeah,
And she was already alert and knew where I was. So people say those heavy arrow builds slow your bow down too much, and that's not the case. You
not
just
at
gotta,
all.
You got to remember, 15 years ago, 250 feet per second was screaming.
Oh, absolutely.
So you go up 260 feet per second still, and you've got a Plan B arrow in case you hit something hard. I've watched so many hunt shows where guys hit the shoulder blade, and they don't end up finding the deer because they get almost into one lung or just puncture one lung barely, and the deer lives through it. And that's because they're shooting a 380, 400 grain arrow with a 2-inch mechanical, and when it opens, it loses all its energy in that shoulder blade and doesn't get through the other side. Well, my dad's deer just from 2 weeks ago in Indiana, he's shooting 55 pounds with a 500 grain arrow build, and he punched through both of the deer's shoulders and he had everything except for his veins hanging out the other side, and that was straight through the middle of both shoulder blades. So
that's awesome.
It's definitely something worth looking into. If you don't have a heavy arrow build, I strongly encourage doing your homework on it.
Cool. Well, I know you said you had to get off here a little after 8, so I don't want to hold you too much longer. Any last suggestions or tips you give to anybody? I mean, what's one last, I guess, most important thing you can tell somebody if they're going in the woods?
Get away from people.
Yeah, pressure's huge.
As much as you can. I know it's hard, but I can't give away all my secrets for what I try to do. But as far as getting away from people, get away from the parking lots, get off the beaten path, and muddy up your boots. Get places that you don't think other people will go. Watch for thumbtacks, watch for flagging tape. That's something that I've learned this year. Is it looks good, and then when I go in the dark, I'm starting to see night eyes, and I'm like, what the heck, man? I guess I should have been paying attention for these.
Right.
And that's one thing to watch for is night eyes, because you won't see them in the daylight, but you'll see them going in by flashlight. So kind of keep your eyes peeled for them, and hunt bedding, man. Get into the bedding areas. Get off those wide open acorn flats. Get off those field edges, or you can stay there and I'll appreciate it. But if you want to kill some deer, get down into the thick, nasty stuff and go get them.
Good deal. All right, Spencer. I appreciate your time, man.
Sure, Brian.
We'll be talking again soon, I'm sure. So
we'll do another one here soon.
Awesome. Well, you have a good night, man. I appreciate everything you said.
You too.
All right, we'll see you soon. Yep, bye. All right. Well, a big shout out to Spencer for all that information there. Hopefully that helped you guys out. We got a bunch more of these coming, so get some more guys on here, some more tips for you guys. I guess the biggest thing with this podcast is to get everybody as much info as possible, so you guys can be successful just like they are. So you can do it. We have the deer. It's just a matter of doing the groundwork, doing your homework, getting the boots in the dirt, getting muddy, and figuring it out. So we do have them. You just got to get on them.